Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, the probable cause of AIDS has been found, a variant of a known human cancer virus. Second, not only has the agent been identified, but a new process has been developed to mass-produce this virus. Thirdly, with discovery of both the virus and this new process, we now have a blood test for AIDS. With the blood test, we can identify AIDS victims with essentially 100% certainty.
Thank you, Secretary.
When I first tested positive, I didn't have any real questions about what I was being told. I was told, of course, that I was infected with a deadly virus, that I could expect to die. At that time, the prognosis was 5 to 7 years, that I would need to take drugs that would somehow keep me alive while compromising my health, that I could expect to die of AIDS and not to have anything resembling a normal life. I accepted that and went on to become a public speaker and educator for some local AIDS organizations here. And about 1.5 years into my public service, I ran into some information that caused me to question what I was told, and shortly thereafter I had the personal experience of testing indeterminate, positive, negative, and positive, which really set me wondering what was going on. Really, when we say it's an AIDS test, that's a misnomer. It's not a test for AIDS at all. And surprisingly, something that it took me a long time to figure out, it's not even a test for HIV. The test is for antibodies that are supposed to be antibodies to HIV, but they're not. It's a test for non-specific antibodies that may or may not have anything to do with HIV.
A very heavily referenced review article on the validity of the HIV tests had more or less concluded that they had never been validated. At the time, I didn't quite realize that one of the implications in this article was that HIV itself had never properly been isolated. It was so difficult to isolate and obtain that that was the reason why the HIV tests had never been validated, because to validate a diagnostic test according to the classical, decent standards, you need to show that patients who test positive with your antibody kit have got the virus in them, and patients who don't test positive are free of the virus. Broadly, that would be how you would establish its validity. And that had never been done, because you can't find this virus in AIDS patients or in HIV positive patients.
HIV, first of all, nobody's ever found it in a human being. Think of it. The so-called HIV tests do not detect HIV in a person. They detect your antibodies that react to some proteins that are produced at Abbott Laboratory. They do not find HIV in the person. They find a person's functioning immune system that could react against HIV if it were there. Ultimate test that the establishment offers is what's called a co-culture technique, where you take a sample of the individual's blood cells, white blood cells. You cannot find HIV now in this sample. All you have are these blood cells. But then you culture these cells with some special cells that Robert Gallo generated some years ago. You have to throw in some powerful chemicals, phytohemagglutinin or IL-2, for example, to force these cells to do anything. The idea is to wake up the patient cells to start producing RNA, and then this RNA will be coded in a protein, and possibly then there will be viral particles produced in the medium. These viral particles now will go infect the other cells that you added, and then you will amplify by a period of time the replication of these viral particles in the laboratory, what we call in vitro. Now, these particles did not exist in the patient, in the human being, the person that you got the sample from. You created them in the laboratory. And by creating these virus particles in the laboratory, people say they have isolated HIV from a human being. They have not done any such thing.
I don't recommend people ever getting tested. The reason is, I don't know what the tests mean, and I think no one else knows what the tests mean. I've never seen any evidence that what these tests purport to show, they're actually showing, namely the presence of a virus, the presence of an exogenous virus. I really would like to see the electron microscopic data of this, and apparently there is none. There is none where you've done a rigorous isolation protocol.
The test is for antibodies that are supposed to be antibodies to HIV, but they're not. It's a test for non-specific antibodies that may or may not have anything to do with HIV. So it's not at all like we're being told, and it's really, when you think about it, if you're told that testing is responsible, it's a pretty irresponsible test to be taking. In 1993, in this country, we adopted a definition that caused the number of AIDS cases to double overnight. And part of that reason was, for the first time, we began counting people as AIDS victims who were not ill and who did not have any symptoms. They had a low T-cell count. And that's only one low T-cell count. And T-cells are something that can fluctuate 100% in a given day. So based on a low T-cell count, that year, the number of AIDS cases doubled overnight, and with that definition, there have been 182,000 Americans who are not ill, diagnosed with AIDS, who would not have AIDS if they moved to Canada, because in Canada, they don't recognize that T-cell definition as a criteria for having an AIDS diagnosis. Hey, I'm Christine Majori. I'm convinced it's wrong to encourage HIV testing and to administer death sentences to people who test positive. The HIV test is well documented to cross-react with numerous non-HIV antibodies that can be found in normal, healthy people. They read these as HIV antibodies and give a positive test result. Cold, the flu, flu shots, hepatitis, herpes, rheumatoid arthritis, other immunizations, and pregnancy can read as HIV positive on these tests. Pregnant women who test positive are told they have to take this, AZT or abort. That's an actual AZT label. AZT is a chemotherapy. It's a known carcinogen and works by destroying DNA chains as they're forming in the body. It causes severe anemia, so severe people need blood transfusions. It causes muscle wasting, neuropathy, diarrhea, dementia, spontaneous abortion, fetal deformities, and lymphoma. As we meet here today, there are parents across the country who risk losing their children to state custody for their refusal to give their children AZT. Next week in Eugene, Oregon, the parents of an HIV-negative baby are being charged with negligence and intent to harm for objecting to orders to give their baby AZT. This baby's father is HIV negative, his sister is HIV negative, and he's HIV negative. But since his mother came up positive on an HIV antibody test, the state says that they must give this HIV negative baby AZT, and she cannot breastfeed him. This isn't public health policy, this is madness.
Then, and only then, I started looking into it. I looked up a bunch of papers in science that Bob Gallo, I knew about him and had written. I figured, well, Gallo must have been the one to figure it out, because he's the name I've heard associated with it. And I looked at his papers, and I didn't find anything in there that actually showed me that there was a fact now in science called HIV is the cause of AIDS, or even the probable cause of AIDS, which is all I would have expected, the probable cause of AIDS. Highly probable, because they were attacking the whole problem by then as though it were certainly the cause. So I'd expect it to be highly probable, but I couldn't find anything that said it was remotely probable even. It was possible, but it wasn't probable. And so therefore, it wasn't even close to what you'd call a fact.
Well, I call these the AIDS axioms. AIDS is contagious, AIDS is sexually transmitted, AIDS is caused by HIV, and that the anti-HIV drugs promote health and well-being. The reason I call these axioms is because they're assumed to be true. These four statements are assumed to be true. You cannot find the evidence in the scientific literature that shows that these AIDS axioms are indeed true.